Welcome to this, an Arse Brothers rantcast, an ArseBros OG. We're a day later than what we usually are. And now because of the transfer window and all of the things that have happened, it kind of feels like the game against Sheffield is a little bit redundant. But actually, Toby, when you think about it, with the, I was going to say transfers, but instead now I'm going to say transfer that has come in. It actually raises maybe a lot of answers or a lot of questions about the Sheffield game and about the things we saw in the Sheffield game. So, I mean, to kick it off, there's no point sugarcoating it, Toby. There's no point putting chocolate sprinkles on the turd of what that first half was. It was, in a word, incredibly worrying. Incredibly worrying to see so many old legs and old bodies who didn't seem to have the athleticism or the punch or the speed of movement to actually drive that game forward. And for me, I expected that if there was going to be a game where you would go and put out lots and lots of young legs and lots of dynamic players, that it would be against a deep-sitting Sheffield. But Toby, that's not what we saw, despite a lot of people thinking that lineup was going to be the elusive 4-3-3.
Well, I don't know what you mean about old legs. I don't know about how many old players there were apart from David Luiz, and that's about it. Apart from
old. I include Bellerin in old legs, by the way. Now
he's 20. He's like 25.
Yeah, I know, but his legs are still old, champion.
Anyway, yeah, I'll go away from the old, even though that's quite funny, and say incredibly conservative. That potentially Arteta trusts these players so little that even against a team who notoriously struggles for goals and their main strength is defence and organisation, that we still set up in a way that was very much safety first. So it was a snooze fest. The good part about it is that it seems like it was deliberately snooze fest, and then when it wasn't working, it was changed, and then it did work, and then we hung on. So,
it worked for 15 minutes.
Yeah, well, 10 when Pepe changed the game, and then we still managed to shit the bed and concede and hang on at the end.
Once again, Toby, you and I have spoken about this, that once we lose that shape, we become very open very fast, despite all of a sudden looking like a goal threat. With us, it's like it's one or the other at the moment. Are you feeling that like I am? It's like we either go out in this very conservative, everyone holds their shape, we will not concede setup. And then at some point we change it and we put on these faster assets. But then all of a sudden we're wide open to conceding goals. It's like a juxtaposition of the different Arsenals that we've seen over the years. And what we're looking for is for some kind of amalgamation of the two, I guess.
Well, it was weird. The goal we conceded, I thought, was so sloppy because there was this chasm of space, like a fucking black hole, with no midfielders, like 7 defenders across a line, Xhaka playing somewhere like inside right back, El Neni fucking wherever the fuck, and then Tierney, like everyone just sitting back, Tierney getting absolutely sold on the dummy, offering the inside because he hadn't closed down the space. No one had closed down the space. And we concede a goal from absolutely nowhere.
Belter of a goal,
with very little pressure. Look, it was a belter of a goal, but it was almost like a training ground goal. It didn't even seem it didn't even seem real.
Toby, training ground is how the first halves of Arsenal in most of these games, bar Fulham, have felt for me for this whole season at the moment. It's like everyone in your position, everyone in your structure, move the ball. It's not necessarily about creating chances. It's not necessarily about anything other than just holding that structure and making yourself very hard to beat. And on one hand, it kind of speaks to the last conversation that we had after the Liverpool game, where we spoke about saying that you could either look at it and say that Arteta didn't go attacking enough, or you could look at it and say, no, he's actually intentionally playing 2 games at the moment. The first game is don't lose it, get the control. And then the second game is once you have the control and you can kind of bring on these faster assets later in the game, stretch your legs and go out and try and win it. And it is really difficult for me to watch games because you and I guess we pride ourselves a little bit, Toby, on being less tribal than the average fan and looking at things from both sides. And, we often say, taking a 10,000 foot view of things and trying to work out not just who's playing badly, but why that person is playing badly. And if that guy is playing badly, is that because of someone inside of him or outside of him or the combination? So we do try and take these I guess, higher level views of what's happening in the game at times. And I've got to admit that's something that I'm finding I'm having to do in every game at the moment because the football isn't free-flowing and the football isn't like, I was about to say, watching at Liverpool, but they got royally arse-fucked. But one of the parameters, Toby, that I think, and this does speak to the Liverpool game as well, that we do have to take into account and that Arsenal fans have to take into account was 3 games in a week. Training in there, twice a week as well. So they're constantly running, they're constantly moving. There were players doubling up in those games. There were some fresheners and people benched and stuff like that. But you would expect teams to be leggy with 3 games in a week and really using the expanse of their squad there as well.
Yeah, look, definitely. I mean, the 3 in a week, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's the start of the season. There is decent squad rotation. You had Eddie coming in for Lacazette. Aubameyang, I'll say tongue in cheek, does fuck all anyway.
So he hasn't had the best start. He hasn't had the best start to the season. Something we might chat about later on.
Glides across the pitch. Doesn't exert too much energy. I'm a little bit concerned at his work rate off the ball. And so there was rotation there. We had El Neni coming in. So which was slightly surprising, and I'm sure we'll get on to that in the discussion a little bit later.
Yeah, we're gonna yell at Ryan later on. Yeah. We're collectively gonna bully the shit out of Ryan. In about 5 minutes.
Before we finish that question? What was Manny's name? L sideways.
L
point before we move on. It was there was a bit of rotation, but it's this very safety first approach. It's down to the individual to make something happen. We have a very controlled, don't leave your space approach. And then it's I've been banging on this for a couple of weeks now. It's one of those wide players that has to take a risk receiving the ball in a very tight situation or a pass that might not be on. And to bypass that defense, whether it be through dribbling or pass. And that's that moment of risk taking, which we're not fluid. The spaces are huge in between our players at the moment. And that's why we need players with more forceful and long range passing, particularly in the center.
Ball carrying ability.
Ball carrying. Yeah. And so we lose the ball and we sort of go, it's almost like running down a cul-de-sac, like running down a blind alley. And that's when the possession is turned over. And when we do have possession, it's quite sterile. It's the back 3 passing along the chain.
It's Toby, it's don't lose it before you've put yourself in the game and given yourself an opportunity to win it. It reeks to me of Arteta not having faith in his team in those attacking systems to not bin it before they've had a chance to get into it. And it goes back to what you and I were saying last week about the players that he's putting out there at the start of the game are being put out there to hold position, to hold spaces, to not make runs, to not make individual efforts that then somehow break down the structures of that system. And that's why when you do see, guys like Pepe come on and, players we haven't seen as much this season, guys like Joe Willock, when you do see those guys come on, they do have that ability to I guess, start playing outside of the orchestra. To go and have a solo. And the unfortunate thing is that's where the exciting part of football lives. The exciting part of football isn't watching a very well-structured, very well-drilled team hold possession, not make runs outside of their zones, have their places they need to go when they're in possession, their place they need to go when they're out of possession. And it can get very easy for Arsenal fans to start picking on those players and to start saying, well, you're shit and you do a terrible job and you do this and you do that. But maybe that is the mandate of what is being asked. Where I would put my counter argument to that is I don't think that is what Arteta wants to do. I think that is what Arteta is being forced to do due to the types of players he has. This isn't like anyone who's like, oh, well, he definitely wants to be playing El Neni in midfield. He fucking doesn't. At this stage, he's maybe just looking at El Neni and saying, you are going to fuck up the least. And if we can hold on for a period of time, once people do get tired, once you do get tired defenders, that's when Pepe's can come out and exploit them.
Well, it's that waiting for that quality to shine through. So at the end of the day, it's breaking a team down, getting them fatigued to the point where the inevitable error will come, and then relying on one piece of magic from one of your sort of top-end individuals, whether, in this game it was a Pepe, other games it's a Aubameyang, So
even Aubameyang nearly smashes one top corner from absolutely nothing. Like the ball pops out to him, he dips onto his right and smashes a dipping shot, and that's almost like what you're saying. That's that what he's waiting for is that quality to come to the fore. But again, it shows. I think it was on Potsy's tactical podcast that he did. Arsenal averaged less than eight attempts per game, not on goal. Goal attempts, So
no, I know it
across
can
90
be,
minutes.
Like I will watch every minute of every game because that's what I'm like. But it can be boring as batshit at times, So, I think part of it is this is going a little bit off topic. Is that the amount of overcoaching these days is why we don't have much broken play anymore, and I feel like it's an error which will lead to, rather than multiple errors and the game opening up and that real end-to-end free flow, disjointed football that we used to really love, almost the blind stupidity of English football where you just counter and attack and counter and attack.
It's
and it's just
almost like, Toby, how you don't see like Tony Yeboah crackers anymore, Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank. You don't see people taking ridiculous shots from 30 yards out because the coach will fucking maul you. He will be like, that is low percentage. The high percentage move is to recycle possession, get back out to the wings, come back to the center. And, that's you and I have had this conversation a number of times that if you break down modern football is nowhere fucking near as exciting as like the peak of modern football. I guess that like maybe late 90s into early 2000s when the game was becoming professionalized and you had genuine athletes in the game, but you could still have like a fat cunt like Matt Letizier who was shit and just ate fucking pies and mushy peas and drank fucking gallons of lager and would go out there on a Saturday and just fucking smash one because his natural God-given technique was so good. I read a really interesting thing. I can't remember whether it was a tweet or it was something. I think it was Robbie Savage wrote it. And Robbie Savage is a fucking gobshite, right? But he was essentially saying that players like him and David Beckham and even maybe to an extent Paul Scholes, if they were coming through now, wouldn't be the amazing players that they were because they were different types of players. Like they weren't pure athletes. He was like, he was too slow to be a footballer. Beckham wasn't an athlete. Scholes was a little fat kid with incredible technique. So there is this thing at the moment that I agree with you. It's at times very, very hard to watch Arsenal. And I was thinking the other day that I should start watching more football again because I don't watch a lot of football. I really do primarily watch Arsenal.
Yeah, me
because
too.
Sometimes when you watch the highlights of other teams, like I watch mini-match, like 25-minute mini-matches, I wonder if this is, systemic across everyone or if this really is just a protective strategy for Arsenal right now to shield ourselves against the much maligned average players that we
Yeah,
have.
true. Can I make one point before we move on? Was with coaching, obviously, that first goal is so important. And the ball from Aubameyang to Willock to Nketiah, if that had happened in that first few minutes, then that would have forced Sheffield out and the game might have been a bit more interesting. So a lot does rely on that first goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Toby, couple of things, because these review shows we do, guys, the way Toby and I have decided to do this is you all watch the fucking game, right? So we don't want to just go through the game. We don't want to review it like minute by minute, and this incident happened and that incident happened, and what did you think of this and how was the goals? It's not our jam on Arse Bros. Instead, we're going to pull some things apart from the game and have some kind of like high-level conversations about them. So, Toby, first conversation starter from the Sheffield game that I thought is worthy of talking about, and that is, I'm going to do it for people listening, I'm making the in-air quotation marks, formation, Toby. Formation, right? The obsession with formation with fans at the moment. Now, a lot of people for a lot of that game, when the team lineup got released, they saw that as a 4 at the back. And we did play 4 at the back for periods of time. But Toby, for me, El Neni played on the right of a 3 with Bellerin in an advanced midfield position for at least very, very much of that first half. Bellerin well in advance for El Neni, and El Neni in that right slot. Did you see the formational changes? Did you see something different in this game that you hadn't seen? Did you see the El Neni to the back 3 as I did?
No, I definitely didn't see that. So that was a surprise when you pointed that out to me. I mean, yeah, I was aware that Bellerin was advanced, but that's the nature of the wing-back play that we play anyway. They're almost like pseudo-right wingers when they receive the ball. I think the way it works is the midfielder just goes and covers the space where the fullback or an advanced fullback would be. I saw it more as a, as that horseshoe type of shape, which the midfielders are there purely to distribute and not leave their post. And I sort of find that, I'm not going to say it's boring, but I saw the deficiencies, particularly with El Neni, because of the inability to progress the ball or have any type of long-range passing game. So if you're going to be that far away from the players that you're playing off, his only really ball is to back to the defense or across to Hector. And then it just kind of comes back again and goes back the other way and across the pitch in the, in that sort of sterile domination of possession, which is really doing nothing. So I didn't see what you saw. I understand how fluid Arteta's systems are and that, there's a different formation that, in attack and off the ball, and when players leave certain zones, other players come in. But I think fundamentally it's the starting position with 2 pretty deep-lying central midfielders against a fairly low block Sheffield.
Well, Gabriel was more advanced for much of that game, was more advanced in the first half than even Ceballos was, because Gabriel was going beyond Ceballos. And El Neni, I don't think, went ahead of Bellerin at any point. And he only really came into the midfield late in the first half, where he took up a central position, where then I saw Louise had actually drifted out onto the right as well. And it's interesting that we do have these conversations, and that's why I brought it up, because we're all in a chat and we all sort of pass information around. Scunny and I were having a conversation. We're like, where is this meant to be? Where is this meant to be being played? Like, what is the aim of this zone? And we were looking at Hector's performance in the first half, and we were like, is Hector, like, he's definitely not playing as a wing back. He's almost playing as an inside right channeled midfielder. And you must admit, Toby,
I
that right channel, that disconnect
I was going to
down
say
the right.
that's kind of where AMN was playing at that time, where he was playing as a pseudo right-sided midfielder.
Yeah, but didn't fucking work for Hector. It was very, 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 very mundane. And Toby, you have to say that whole right channel in that first half, that access which ended up being really El Neni, Bellerin, Willian was diabolical. As far as invention, incisive passing, anyone getting forward. And it's interesting because we do have these conversations, Toby, and this is what I was saying about us trying to take a little bit more of a higher view. A lot of people drilled Willian in that game. Even guys in our group, they really, really went after Willian. Now, I thought Willian had a crap game until later on in the game, and we will go into that. I'm kind of treating this as two parts. We'll have a chat because really it was that players had two completely different performances in those two different halves as the game changed. But without Bellerin ever going beyond Willian or getting close to Willian to be able to actually interchange with him, it really stifles what Willian is meant to do. He's not a Pepe. He's not a lightning player who's going to pick up the ball and drive at someone and drop his shoulder and go. He's a technical player who likes receiving the ball in tight spaces. He's got a good drop of the shoulder. He will do someone with technicality, but he's not going to burn them. And then you've got Hector, who's not going to burn anyone. And then you've got El Sidewaysy, who is just going to play the most risk-averse pass that he can play. Whatever the options are, if there's a 10 out of 10 pass, an 8 out of 10 pass, and a 5 out of 10 pass, El Sideways is going to go the 10 out of 10 pass 95% of the time and just rack up stats that way. He's the least likely to fuck up, but he's also the least likely to create anything.
No, for sure. So, look, there are two parts to that question. I don't think Willian is lacking pace. I just think he suits broken play more. So with Sheffield, who are incredibly well set up not to concede, it didn't really work. They got the pressure. Willian's best work was running back towards his own goal. Do you remember that particular move where he dribbled around everyone and was actually running back towards bloody Leno and skipped around and like got out and got the out ball and all that stuff? And I thought, well, that's the best thing you've done all half. And Bellerin playing in that midfield role. So I saw it a little bit differently, although Bellerin wasn't excellent going forward in terms of his possession keeping and being part of that midfield structure. I didn't think he was too bad. And I think that's kind of where his game is going. He's fairly technically secure and less more of that bombing forward and crossing type of fullback. So not saying that's good or bad, but that's just my judgment. So it's interesting. Whereas that player, and I keep referring to it, that release valve player, either release valve or can beat someone just with sheer trickery. The only player we have in our team really like that is Pepe. You know, maybe you could argue a Rizz Nelson at times if he gets into form, has the technique to play around in that particular role. But we are quite lacking.
You know, and Aubameyang doesn't. Aubameyang, despite Aubameyang having the athletic capacity to do that, that is not his game either. And I think that's what I was kind of saying about Willian. I wasn't calling Willian slow. I just simply meant that it's not part of his game to knock a ball past someone and burn them. You know, and I come back to the same. There are a lot of athletes in that team who it's not their particular game to do what Pepe did when Pepe came on, which is really taking advantage of static defenders with nothing but pace and power and trickery. Toby, the changes that came on in the second half. Now, you would agree with me that it was by no means like we made these changes and all of a sudden we blitzed them for 45 minutes. We spoke about at the start that the deficiencies that occurred when Bellerin went so far forward to get his assist. I think he got an assist and I think he got a pre-assist. And Willian kind of pulling into the midfield. We did move into, once Pepe came on, very much a more structured 4-3-3. We also got to have a look at what a lot of pundits who I really respect have started saying. So Clive from Arsenal Vision, who has said for a very, very, very long time, similar to what you and I have been saying, that the space is out wide, Aubameyang needs to be out there because the hard work is through the middle. We did finally get to see what happens when you all of a sudden go and move someone who's technical like Willian into a midfield three behind the lines, where he can actually start to use his passing and use his ability and start to link up with Ceballos, Willian, Saka down that left edge. When they were all going together, that was highly, highly technical. Having a look at that, having a look at Aubameyang coming into the middle of that three, like I was saying, it's something that Clive was talking about on Arsenal Vision last week, about how we need to get all of our running and all of our legs into that front three and all of our dynamism into the front three to start pulling around defenders and be structured behind them while letting those guys run free. Did you kind of like what you saw in that 20 minutes of Aubameyang in the middle? Because he definitely maybe didn't cause them a huge amount of problems with his shooting, but his movement and his pace and his little diagonal runs to front and rear post from centre definitely opened up the space for the guys around him. Definitely opened up the space for Bellerin.
And the lovely little pre-assist for Bellerin.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So I liked it because Lacazette, to me, is becoming, even though he scored 3 goals in 3 games, he is increasingly, I'm going to say like Jermaine Defoe without the good goals.
He is an unimaginative striker for me.
Yeah. He's like bumbling a ball in. He's hardworking, but it's not particularly attractive. I think we saw the flaws in Eddie a little bit, even though I'm certainly not going to discount him yet. I love his pace up front and his work rate. But the thing for me is that we're missing out on having Saka in an advanced left position, and I reckon he's probably our best in that position.
Well, once he went up there, he was fucking deadly, pulling into the centre and.
Yep, and we're also missing out on Willian on the left, and I think he's best off the left as well. So the left of the
midfield three, yeah, that's exactly where he came on.
And he started running at people from deeper rather than running very close to the defence. So I thought that worked in open play as well, and the interchanges and the clever stuff where Saka's coming in centrally and Willian shifting over to the right. So the fluidity that way. That's why I like Aubameyang being in the centre, because he's not clogging up the left so much. He's a guy that plays on the left who really needs the wing back and the left-sided forward player to be playing incredibly well. And then he drifts over to the centre or receives the ball in behind from, a David Luiz ball or something like that.
He needs to have the license to drift to the left and drift to the centre, not be pinned to the left.
Yeah. In my opinion. So I'm actually going back the other way, where I'd like to see him through the middle more, because we certainly don't have an elite striker up top. We don't have anyone who can hold the ball up and distribute like a Giroud or something like that. Lacazette can't do that. Eddie can't do that. So I think what we're doing is we are, by shifting Aubameyang back into the middle, we're using our assets on the left a lot better. And it opens up more game opportunities to have someone like a Pepe on the right and a Saka on the left, or a Willian, or, Nelson at certain times. And then the other two can be backup strikers. There's plenty of games.
But in saying that, Toby, I think it is a solvent point to make that in that initial system, before Pepe came on and Willian moved into midfield, if you start Aubameyang up top and ask him to do the Eddie role and ask him to do the Lacazette role, it's not going to work. Those issues that we talked about there not being space there and him getting bashed and him not receiving the ball, that's not going to change. So essentially what we're saying is, once you move into a more fluid attacking system, a less risk-averse system, that's when you can start to put Aubameyang there, because in a less risk-averse system, there are more moving pieces set up with less structured roles, which then allows him to drift and float in and out of the game. So again, Toby, it's not like it is. I often comment on people on Twitter. I'm like, it's not FIFA, right? You can't just pick. You can't just pick your best 11 and say, well, a front three of Saka, Aubameyang, and Pepe, because the front three of Saka, Aubameyang, and Pepe is amazing. as long as the assets and the system behind it and the structures that are behind it work, because otherwise we end up in this situation like we saw even towards not even the end of that game, from like 65, 70 odd minutes, when the structures started to break down and we became fatigued and we stopped holding the ball as well. And Sheffield then actually, instead of sitting deep, which was allowing us to play that really front foot football with lots of people in the box, once Sheffield needed to get a goal and they kind of, I guess, what would you call it? Like concertinaed back out instead of being so compressed. Once they concertinaed,
and they also didn't have anything to lose, because at 2-0 down, there's no point shutting up shop. You got to come out. But then once
they opened up, Toby, it made a little bit of a mockery of what that midfield was. It made a little bit of a mockery of having Hector, beyond Pepe on the right and Pepe inside, and Aubameyang and Saka and Willian. You just cannot have that many assets that far forward without the right players behind them to cover those kind of explosive tracking runs and being able to get on top of people.
But we have so many players back. That's what I'm saying. It's kind of like a 50-50. It's an attack and defense situation, and the central midfielders, and maybe it's time to talk about El Sideways now. Their remit is to stay. And this is what I was talking about in the monthly pod the other day. Those two central midfielders, and this is where hopefully we have an opportunity to move into a midfield three. Really, their role is to occupy and cycle possession. That's it. You do not leave that space. And that's why a player like Bloody Xhaka plays every single week, because his task is to be committed and to take the direction of the manager and not leave that zone.
I'm no Xhaka fan, but we missed him in this game. This was as much as you could look at a game and say, you miss Xhaka. And that's where I look at that El Neni performance.
But how far away? So one of my things with Xhaka is not only that he doesn't leave that defensive post, and we all know his athletic deficiency
limitations. Yeah.
But when the game is broken and players are running at him or beyond him. But what he does have is a long passing game. So when you've got El Sideways, who makes 5 to 10 yard passes and just cycles possession, that's more suited to an old Wenger team. High possession, lots of little triangles, players very close to each other and making little runs constantly. So he's trying to do that, but his attacking players are freaking 30, 40 yards away from him. And all he's doing is playing little layoff passes to Ceballos or back to the defense. So, I know our back three are quite capable on the ball, but it's also his job to progress the ball and do something in an attacking sense with it. So
anything in an attacking sense. That's what I mean about him being the most risk-averse player on the pitch. And I don't think you can have someone that risk-averse when the way we're playing is we're either left side dominant or right side dominant, is in our channels very, very separate. And, when I was sitting there and I was looking at Bellerin's performance, like I was saying at the start, and I was looking at Willian's first half performance, I thought to myself, well, how are they ever meant to get on the front foot when there's no ball through the lines for them? It's like, I know we always go back to rugby league, but it's really like carting the ball back up off your try line. Everything's in your face. There's no room for you. You need someone to at least provide something to get you on the front foot. And then the problem is El Neni goes into Bellerin, who's not an AMN and like a line-breaking runner or a carrier of the ball. So he only has his technicality to rely on, which means he then needs people to get very close to him. And then I found that Willian kept getting closer and closer and closer to him, which just isolated them again. And then the ball would recycle and go back out. So, I think it would be very easy to sit there and say El Neni was complete crap. I'm not going to buy into the line that El Neni is complete crap, but I'm also not going to buy into the ridiculous that is brother Ryan McMurray giving him fucking man of the match because he had a 98% pass completion over like four fucking yards. And then look at this. We got one comment and look at what this bloke has to say. Xhaka comes on and we concede. Have you ever met a man who was anything other than like, he is anyone but Xhaka at all costs?
Oh, God. And where was El Neni closing down that space when Xhaka was on?
But El Neni was man of the match, and he
yeah. Anyone but Xhaka.
Yeah. Toby, two performances. Look, we haven't spoken about Pepe, but I think that would be the obvious thing to speak about. It's a great goal. He comes on. He changes the game with his pace, with his power, with his unpredictability. I don't think we need to go much more into that.
The second goal was brilliant individually. The first goal was more important because it changed the game. So his ability to run at people and just hold on to the ball and start connecting with the players around him, that it drew players in, it attracted defenders, that opened up Aubameyang. Aubameyang makes a lovely through ball, chip over the top, goal. It was really nice because of that, and we didn't have that at that point. But substitutions are very useful. So I'm not going to say that Willian had a completely crap game because I didn't think he did. I just think it was a difficult game because of the opposition. Now, what happened nicely was that those defenders by that time have been playing and concentrating for 60 or 70 minutes. And then you bring on X Factor like Pepe.
Yeah. Wild card, baby.
Who can often be pretty poor when he starts a game.
So is he not the ideal substitute, Toby?
I think he absolutely can.
Do you think this might not, everyone pushing for players to start, is this not maybe exactly what he might get used as this year, which is bring the players on, bring the structured players on, and then once the game is starting to get pulled apart or defenders are starting to get tired at 50 minutes and 60 minutes, you bring on fast assets who are unpredictable wild cards, who have trickery, who have footwork. The games open up for him. And Pepe hasn't had to do the 45 or 50 minutes of grinding, boring work that seems to put him in a foul mood anyway.
Yeah, and maybe physically he's not up to it yet. He's still a pretty slight character. So the physical demands of playing that total football style of game, it is tiring, and maybe you don't have that extra burst of pace when it comes to that attacking opportunity. So I wouldn't say he is only substitute fodder because it's up to him.
I think that's where the mistake gets made, Toby, because a substitute for 35 minutes is as important as a starting player for 55 minutes.
Of course, you didn't let me finish my point.
I just don't want to get into the mentality that you couldn't be a world-class player from the bench.
No. But what I'm saying is it's up to him to fight for that starting spot. So there's absolutely no problem with that. And I love, sometimes I think Arteta leaves it a bit late to make changes and doesn't give them an opportunity.
He did it quite early in this game. He pulled Eddie off, hooked Eddie early.
In this case, it did. It was great that Aubameyang went into the centre. Once again, if you're a defender and you've played 60, 70 minutes, the last thing you want to do is have extra pace to defend against. And then the positional switches I thought worked really well. One player who we haven't mentioned, I thought actually struggled in this game that no one else has saw that he struggled was Tierney. I thought he really struggled this game.
Me and Scunny both thought that Tierney had quite a good game. He got up and down his wing. He got in advanced positions. He was the only winger to get in advanced positions. But unfortunately for Tierney, he's getting in those positions and he's knocking balls into the middle. There aren't multiple players approaching the middle because the midfield weren't getting forward to get additional numbers into the box. And he's got Eddie in there. And as kind of much of a little terrier as what Eddie is, he's not going to climb up, smash a header in. I said to Scunny, said to him at halftime, I said, do you know what player would suit this first 45 minutes, this thing we keep doing? What player would suit Arsenal more than anyone right now?
Giroud.
It's Giroud. You almost want a big man who's going to score goals with his head, because a lot of the time when we are getting crosses in that formation, they're deeper crosses. They're not kind of like byline whipped in like what we saw in the goals later on. They are kind of deeper, more booming crosses.
You do have very big number 9s elsewhere in the Premiership, though. You've got fucking like Mopé, you've got Mitrovic. Like, they're players who are big units that can do both.
I would love to have something like that on the bench. I think there's a little bit at the moment with Arsenal with those strikers that Eddie does one thing and Laka does another thing, but neither of them do the third thing, which is be big. I know that sounds stupid that you can't tell someone who's small to be big, but like Toby, for example, when we used to have our Pro Ev competition with you and me, no matter who I picked up front. So I always used to have Tevez, right? Tevez was my boy. Toby, you've got PTSD about Tevez in our Pro Ev games. I just used to kill you with him. But I always had a player like Dzeko. I always had a player like Andy Carroll, like someone on the bench who I could just completely change the system and start knocking balls into. And I do like that idea of getting different shaped players. And especially if you look at the way Arteta is looking to change games, at the 60-minute mark, if it is working or it's not working, I would really like to see us, for the next striker we go after, go and get someone who's above 6 foot and strong in the air.
Well, maybe that's why Man U got Cavani. You never know.
Maybe. What did he play last year? Like 12 games or something like that. I think he scored like 3 goals for the year. Anyway, fuck Man U. So yeah, look, Toby, last player who because we're running out of time, you've got to go in a tick. But last player I think who has continued his amazing form is Gabriel. Very, very good distributing, very good on the ball, very strong. Again, I don't think we really need to go that much more into that. 5 minutes left, Toby.
Very, very impressive. Very impressive.
5 minutes left. I just wanted to talk to you very, very quickly. We are going to do a whole breaking down the transfer window podcast with Manny. It might be tomorrow. It might be the day after. Manny is ropeable for some reason. He's ropeable that we haven't been able to clear all the dross out. I think he's predominantly upset that the Kolasinac rumour and the Mustafi rumour weren't in fact true. But Toby, just very quickly, having looked at what our midfield offered in that game, in both systems, in both the front-footed system and the back-footed system, or I guess you would call it the structured system and the unstructured system that we played in those games, the signing of Thomas Partey, I know you don't know a huge amount about him, you don't watch a lot of La Liga, but that style of player, let's call it a throwback, and I don't want to use it, but a throwback to the Vieira-style player, big, strong, and predominantly ball-carrying midfielder. How do you think the signing of a player like that is going to change the fortunes of those teams in both of those structures, both the structured and the unstructured?
Well, I just think it provides us options to move away from a back three. So if we can have, and we talk about the players that we've got not having the ability to cover the space or move the ball with only 2 of them in that space. So you introduce a third player and you can have, and what it may end up being is a bit lopsided because you're going to have one on one side. I assume Partey will play on the right side of a midfield 3. You might have Ceballos over on the left, and most likely you're going to have the guy who's going to stick will be Xhaka out of those 3.
Everyone thinks TP is going to be a DM. I don't think he will in a 4-3-3. I think Xhaka will anchor it, and Ceballos and Partey either side.
From what I've heard from the stats that Dan Potts was talking about the other day, I think he'll be a box-to-box number 8 style player.
I think there's 2 options. No, sorry, you go. I thought you were done.
No, I just think that'll suit the players that we have. And what we're saying about this transfer window and not getting too shirty about it is you've got to look internally for solutions. All right? So we know what players we've got. There's no point just going out and saying I need to buy X, Y, and Z with an owner that clearly won't do that and a structure that won't do it and all of the deadwood that we have that we can't clear anyway. So we have to look internally as to what we've got. And I think with Xhaka, I think he'll sit deep and do exactly what he's been doing, but with more support and more running either side of him. Ceballos plays on the left predominantly anyway and does very well, ticking the ball over. And you might end up finding that Partey is the one that goes furthest beyond and is both a defender and an attacker from a midfield sense.
Well, the thing that he brings us that no one else does, Toby, or the closest would be Joe Willock, is a pure ball carrier, a guy who will actually get on the ball and will actually drive from midfield, which then disrupts structure, which I think is something we really struggle about because we struggle to break down structure. I think with structure, it's often easier to dribble through structure than it is to pass through structure. As in defensive structure, it's set up to block the balls and block the channels. But when you get someone who can explode, who does run past people, it changes things. Look, I think
And-
there's
and-
going to be
Yep. And
I think
it'll
it's
be
gonna
really,
a couple
it'll
of
be,
options.
yep.
Sorry,
No.
I think there's going to be a couple of options, Toby. I think you're going to see a 4-2-3-1, which I think is going to be a very, very, very attacking structure, where you may see Xhaka Ceballos, Xhaka Party. The funny thing for me is in all of these systems, somehow I still see Xhaka there. Ceballos Party, I think, will be a weird one that we're going to have to look at. But I think in one system, you're going to see a 4-3-3, which I think is going to be our more structured system, and that Xhaka deep with Party one side and Ceballos on the other. And then I think you're going to see an amalgamation of that system, which is more like a 4-2-3-1, where you might actually finally get to see Willian's out of 10s, Pepe's out of 10s, ESR's played out of there, almost a floating role. And that's where I think in that 4-2-3-1, you may end up seeing an Aubameyang up top by himself because there's enough behind him. Toby, I know you got to go, so let's bounce. Let's end this so you can crack on with your day, and we will be back with a hot topic with Manny, where most likely him and I are going to argue viciously about the work that's been done. Tobes, have a great afternoon. I'll speak to you soon. To all the listeners, up the Arsenal, subscribe, you pack of cunts. See ya.